Thank you very much, Alan, and it's great to be here. I would like to thank everybody who sacrificed a very fine, nice day in the best place on earth to come and attend this lecture here. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. And I start by saying the Islamic greeting, which says, Assalamu alaikum, meaning peace be upon all of you. And actually, the topic, the Islamic Sharia, is a topic that is complex, to say the least, because the Sharia itself, nowadays, it's taught at the universities around the Muslim world especially, and some in North America even. And so people have specializations in parts of the Sharia. So you can imagine, the greatness or the vastness of this topic. What I'm trying to do today is just tell you about some of the principles of the Sharia. What is it? And then you can judge for yourself. I guess that's the best thing, if this is a threat to Canada or not, or the values in the Sharia, if they are compatible with the values of Canada. So those conclusions you draw yourself. So I will start first of all by saying that, and this thing is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. See, Muslims are not allowed to put pictures usually. So they used calligraphy to eventually beautify the mosque and many of the different palaces that they have. So this is the Arabic language in the name of God, the merciful, the most merciful. Basically what that says there. I want to start with talking about the Islamic worldview, because those things are very important to understanding the Sharia. The first word that is important to remember for Muslims and for non-Muslims who are trying to understand what is the Sharia is the word Tawheed. And Tawheed means basically is the oneness of God. That God or Allah, and incidentally the word Allah is only the Arabic translation of the word God. So Jews and Christians who live in the Arab world, they use the same word. They use Allah when they refer to God too. So it's not God that Muslims worship is not a different God of the Christians and Jews. This is important to remember. And we call him Rabb al-Alameen. He is basically the Lord of all creation, of everything that is created. And then when you say that, then also, of course, the human being. He is the sustainer, he is the creator. And it does not matter if people acknowledge the existence of God or not, because there are some people who say there is no God. And so for them, there's no problem. Of course, it's still within the Islamic perspective. It doesn't matter if people admit that or not. God is still the creator. And he is still the provider and the sustainer of all of humanity. And we say usually that God is the only one who is worthy of worship. That is also very important. And he created everything and made the universe suitable for humans to live in. Now, the purpose of our existence as Muslims, we believe that is to worship God alone. And then you ask the question, how can you worship God? Does that mean you have to be at the mosque the whole day? Or how do you run your affairs? Well, the concept of worship in Islam is so vast that it includes everything. It includes all of the human activities, including our work, our sleep, our vacation, our nurturing children. Anything that you can imagine as a human activity is included in the Islamic perspective. And so when I'm talking now about the Islamic Sharia, I want you to remember it's basically talking about eventually the whole of Islam. And Muslims usually say that Islam is a way of life. And so it covers everything in their life. Now, God created everything, and he made this universe suitable for us to live in. The only creatures or the only creation that is given a choice are mankind and jinn. And jinn, Muslims believe, are a creation from God. They are created out of fire. Sometimes we refer to Satan, for instance. Satan is made out of fire. Satan is a bad part of the jinn, but some of the jinn are good. We're not going to talk about the jinn. We cannot see them. We do not know much about them. So we talk about mankind. But just, this is in passing that Muslims believe that two creations are responsible because they have a choice. Other creation does not have a choice, so they are not responsible. And when I say other creation, I mean animals, I mean stars, I mean planets, I mean rivers, trees. Those go according to certain laws that God put on earth for them to run by. But for the human being, there are certain laws that we do not think about, and we are going according to the laws of God. When we eat, we do not think how we digest what we eat. Nobody, after we eat an apple or anything, a meal, we do not sit and say, okay, now it's going down my throat here, and now it's arriving here, and this is the process that it's going through. We don't think about these things, but they do happen by themselves, by the laws that God Himself put inside of us. What we are responsible for is our actions and our deeds, and that is a very important aspect in Islam. So Muslims believe life is a test, so we are put here for a purpose, and that purpose is to worship God, meaning to go according to the rules and regulations that God put for us here, basically through revealed books and through messengers that came from God. Prosperity and tranquility is really the essence that is sought by the Sharia, by the system that God revealed for humanity. God would like for people to succeed and prosper. There is no friction in the Islamic view between God and man. I know this view exists in the Greek mythology, and sometimes even some stories in the Bible tell us about, a fight between God and, was it Jacob? So that kind of conflict in Islam, we do not believe it exists, because who are the human beings to stand up to God? There is no comparison. So basically we say, where God is so great, we are only created by God. And so we do not see any conflict. What we see is that God is so merciful that He got everything ready for us, and He provided the system for us to live with. So when the human being follow the system, then you find that peace, harmony, and tranquility are achieved. And that's in Islam we say, "Udkhulu fis-silmi kaffa," you enter into peace totally. And you can only achieve that when you submit yourself to the will of God, who is the creator of all laws and who is the creator of everything. If you buy a computer these days, you would like for the manufacturer to provide you with the catalog by which to, run your computer. And then you find everything in there, and there's troubleshooting, and there's different ways to operate the system. They tell you about it. So the same thing, God created everything, and He provided for us the catalog by which to run our lives. So the Sharia is seen by Muslims again as a way of life for the believers. And I say for the believers because if people do not believe in the Sharia, of course they will not, or they are not responsible for it. And this is one of the things that are so authentic, so basic in Islam, is that you cannot force the religion on anybody else. It is the freedom of the person to decide for themselves what religion they want to follow, or lack of religion or no religion, whatever they want to decide for themselves. That is the choice that is given to them by God, and no Muslim, no human being should take this away from any other human being. So it is the decision is or belongs with the individual. Usually we see that the Quran addresses the believers, and it says, "Oh, those who you believe, ya ayyuhalladhina amanu." in regard to all aspects of life, actually. So in the Quran, and this is another way that I'm trying to say, see how the Sharia really for Muslims, it includes everything. So it includes the fasting, the praying, being dutiful to parents, lending money, economic issues, political issues, social issues, all kinds of issues that we face. There's something in the Sharia to say about them. So being best in ethics and manners, very important. Avoiding backbiting, rumors, all of those issues. Standing up for justice for all people, standing up for the underprivileged, helping the needy, feeding the hungry, caring for the neighbor. All of those are Islamic values, authentic Islamic values, and they're all in the Quran by the direction of God. And He is saying to the people in general, you do this and you do that in order to live a good life. So those are some of the principles that you find in the Sharia. Now let me just briefly go over some of the pillars of Islam, because they're also important. The pillars of Islam are 5. Number 1 is to testify that there is no God worthy of worship but God or Allah, and that Muhammad is His messenger. So the oneness of God is so important. It's the cornerstone of Islam, that no association whatsoever should be made with God. And in that, the emphasis here, I think, Islam is very much like Judaism in the emphasis that God is one and there should not be any association with Him. Now, the view of the Christians in general with God being 1 in 3 and 3 in 1, the Trinity, the concept of Trinity, is in Islam, it is considered blasphemy. So for Muslims, there is no association, none whatsoever. Not even Muhammad, nobody else. No human being is associated with God. Muhammad is only a messenger. Jesus, Muslims believe, is a very good messenger of God, and he is equal to Muhammad in status. And Mary is a great, great woman. Actually, according to the Quran, Mary is the best woman of all women, including Muslim women. So that's the way Muslims see Jesus and see Mary. But again, I mean, but there's no association with God, none whatsoever. God provided the rules and Muhammad embodied them. Hence, the traditions of the messenger are of paramount importance. So Muhammad is the embodiment of the Quran, Muslims believe. And his example is very important for them to follow. So this is the first pillar of Islam. Then what's called shahada, usually to bear witness that there is no God but God and that Muhammad is his messenger. Number 2, we have 5 daily prayers. And those prayers are very important because it keeps the link between the human being and God. Without resorting to God, we are unable to a large degree to meet the challenges we feel that are facing us on earth. And so when we link with God directly without any body being in between, not the Imam, not the mosque, nobody is in between the individual and God, and this is a very important aspect of Islam also, then you feel that this connection is so good that again it empowers the human being. In our prayers, they're spread out throughout the day. We start early in the morning until very much like 2-3 hours after sunset. And so throughout the day, the Muslim is commanded to be connecting with God, and with that, he or she can correct any mistakes that they have done, and they empower themselves, and they feel the peace. And incidentally, one of the names of God, who has 99 names as Muslims believe, one of the names is the peace, as-salam. One of the names of God is as-salam, and Islam itself means also peace and tranquility. And so to put them together, that we say that you achieve the most peace by submitting yourself to the will of God, who is the peace. Some of the easy things in Islam is that when people are supposed to pray, they stand up. But if they cannot stand up, they may sit down. If they cannot sit down, they can, pray while lying. Whether in bed, if somebody is sick, they can even just say it in their mouth, refer to it. But it is important to keep the link with God, because again, it is for our own benefit. There's number 3 is what's called zakah, or almsgiving, or tax if you wish, but it is not a tax in the sense that it's coming from the outside, it's coming from the inside for the Muslim. This is the right of the poor and the wealth of the rich. It is not a charity, meaning that you have to pay it, and the money that is said by God that you pay 2.5%, Muslims believe that 2.5% is not your money anymore. It is the right of the poor and the wealth of the rich. And so this is very important for social justice also, and to feel for the less fortunate. It serves the community as a whole. It purifies the money and the person. Fasting, and actually we are in the month of Ramadan for Muslims. We are fasting. These days we fast from early in the morning, from about 5:15 these days until about 7:30 in the evening. We cannot eat or drink or be intimate with spouse. And this is only the physical aspect, but the most important aspect is that actually we have to conduct ourselves in the best possible manner, or the best manner possible. So that we really have to be good. We have to help others. We have to be, doing good deeds. We have to guard what we say. We have to guard what we see. We have to guard what we hear. So it is really a training camp for the Muslim to learn and to practice self-control. So it is really very important. So this is fasting. I'm going through these fast because those are the basics of the Sharia, but I will be talking shortly about the Sharia and leave some time for questions. The Hajj is the pilgrimage that Muslims are required to do once in a lifetime to visit Mecca, and it is purification, as no argument is allowed actually when a person is doing their Hajj. And I don't know if some of you have seen that scene in Mecca, for instance. You have 2.5 to 3 million people gathered at one place. And then definitely there are some people who are pushing you, some people who are pulling you, and you are supposed to not argue with anybody. You're not supposed to utter a word of disrespect to anybody. You take it and you say, I'm doing this. So this is another training camp for Muslims when they go there, that they have to exhibit the best behavior possible. You can find in it equality, as all people leave behind all of their belongings, because everybody has to be dressed in the white, 2 pieces of white clothing, basically not clothing, actually 2 pieces of cloth they wear. This is for men. For women, they can wear their usual clothing. But for men, it has to be white and 2 pieces of cloth. This is to basically erase the differences between people, and Hajj was a significant phenomenon in the life of Malcolm X. As you know, Malcolm X was calling for black nationalism. When he went to do his Hajj, he said that he was basically sitting with white, with yellow, with blacks, with everybody from all corners of the world, and that changed his view. He came back and he was not talking and saying where blacks are better than whites. He came back and he was saying, whether your actions as a human being, regardless of your race, regardless of your nationality, regardless of your gender, that's what's important. And so he was preaching this after he came back from his Hajj. You can also see that there is a connection between this life and the hereafter, because when people basically die, and as Muslims, we wrap them with white clothing. So for them, this is a remembrance again of what happens when we die, and there is a day of resurrection. Another thing that is important is that they get the connection with Abraham, the prophet and the messenger Abraham, who is the grandfather of Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Because most of the rituals that are being done during this pilgrimage really talk about or reconsider what Abraham did during that time, and also his wife and his son in Mecca. So this is to make the connection between the Abrahamic faith together, all of them together. And I suggest that nowadays we talk a lot about Judeo-Christian values, and I would like to say, really, there is what's called Abrahamic values that combine Muslims with Christians and Jews as being a common ground for all of them, with that at least. So that's Abraham, and so this is Hajj number 5, pillar of Islam. Now there are some pillars of Iman or faith. This is another set for Muslims to believe in. Muslims believe in the oneness of God. This is repeated here again because it's very important. They believe in angels, their creation that's made out of light, and they do different tasks around the world. And they believe in books from God that came to different prophets or with different prophets and messengers. To believe in all messengers. So Muslims believe in all the messengers that are mentioned in the Bible, in the Old Testament. And of course, they believe in Jesus. And number 5, to believe in a hereafter. And I highlighted the 2 of them, the belief in the oneness of God and the hereafter. Let me just mention the last one, to believe in qada and qadar, what's called that there is the divine decree, that God has a plan for this universe. We are here to serve God, and God has a plan. Sometimes we are aware of certain parts, or we understand some of it, and sometimes we do not understand the full plan of God. But there is a plan. So this creation is not in vain. All of the creation is not in vain. It is here for a purpose, and we are here for a purpose. But let me emphasize here that the belief in God and the belief in the hereafter are so important for the Sharia now itself, is that because Muslims submit themselves to God, that's very important. The teachings are coming from God, so they're not coming from another fellow human being. And so nobody is trying to say, I am better than you. I will legislate for you and you follow what I am saying. So there is that sense of equality between people, and at the same time that our submission is to God the powerful. It is not to other people. And so, this aspect is very important. The belief in the hereafter is also very important because we have to examine everything that we do. We have to examine every behavior, every deed, every word we utter. So, because we are responsible on a day when we are going to be resurrected. So before we do anything, then we say, is that good or bad? I am accountable for every action, so I better think about it before I do it. And so there is self-discipline here when a person believes in the hereafter. At least that's the Islamic perspective, and that's what I'm presenting here, the Islamic perspective on those. Now, those sets of pillars, the pillars of Islam, the pillars of faith, are supposed to eventually bear fruits in good behavior of the human being. The pillars of faith are inside of the human mind, inside of our hearts. And the pillars of Islam are some actions and deeds that we do, and people will be, looking at them and seeing them. Both of them are supposed to, again, be shown in our behavior so that we stand up for justice. We are merciful, and we live the peace and tranquility that we are supposed to achieve. And the vast majority of Muslims live in that peace and tranquility. Now, of course, when we look at the media and we look at what's going on in the world, we find that the most violent areas in the world are those in the Islamic world, unfortunately. and we find that there are a lot of violations of human rights within the Islamic world again. But this is eventually the action of the people, and it has political, economic, social reasons rather than the reasons coming from Islam itself. Islam calls for peace and tranquility, but sometimes people are involved in other activities. Again, political issues are very important. When there is occupation, that's very important to be considered. And I hope those issues may come up with some of the questions that I get. But the mercy and justice are eventually the essence of the Islamic Sharia that it tries to build into the human being. Now, people are still human beings. They make mistakes, and that's what we find out, that a lot of Muslims make mistakes, just like other Jews, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, all kinds of people, all kinds of nationalities. It doesn't matter who you are. As a human being, we make mistakes. So we should not assign, any label to anybody just because they did something wrong, and then we condemn their religion. I think this is a mistake. I mean, when Timothy McVeigh did what he did in Oklahoma, and he was a Christian, we did not condemn Christianity just because he was a Christian. It was wrong to do that if anybody did it, but it wasn't done. But anyway, I mean, this is we condemn what the person does, but we look at what the values are and we examine those values, whether of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and other religions, and secular values at the same time, of course, have to be considered. Democracy and all of those values are very important values. For Muslims, there's something called repentance. If they made a mistake, then as human beings, they should repent. They should correct what they have done. They should rectify the situation and ask God for forgiveness. And this usually gives people an avenue to come back into the fold of society. Because if you tell somebody, if you made a mistake, there's no recourse, no other way for you to present yourself or to be back in society, then a lot of times those people will do even more harm. But if you say, okay, you made a mistake, you can correct yourself and come back, that's a good thing that people have as an avenue to come back again into being peaceful and productive in society. Now, after I have talked about all of those, now I may say here that the laws now come into being. So Islam, first of all, builds the human being, builds the good conditions for people to live in, and then the laws come in. And that's exactly, if people study the history of Prophet Muhammad, that he was talking basically about the belief system. He was talking about God. He was talking about the hereafter, about good behavior, about good ethics with people before he introduced any of the laws that came really later on, just before his death, few years before his death. But for the, at least 2/3 to 3/4 of his life, there were no laws for Muslims to, say you will be punished. So in other words, the laws in Islam are meant to be preventive rather than punishment for the human being. Every effort is made to make a good human being. Every effort is made to build peace and tranquility within the individual, within the family, within the community, within the larger community, so that Muslims will live that and in real life. I would like to say that due process does exist within the Islamic law, because I'm quick to say this because we hear a lot of stories about Islamic Sharia being applied at certain countries in certain places, and people are not, we do not see the due process. There is due process in Islam. It's very, very important, and finding ways to reduce what's called the limit, the punishment, if you wish, is very important also. So it is not like if somebody, somebody kills, you kill him right away. No. You have to have evidence. You have to know why the killing occurred. Just like in a court system here in Canada, where all things are considered. I know capital punishment is not allowed in Canada, but in Islam it is allowed, but after a due process. And of course, Islam in that is, many other countries allow capital punishment, like the United States and many other countries. But I mean, this is a debatable thing, of course, for people here in Canada. But I know, the laws are, there is no capital punishment. All people should be equal before the law. Punishments, again, are meant to prevent rather than to punish. Now, I will talk now about some of the principles of the Islamic Sharia itself. So this is the overall picture. I would like for you to imagine this. It's very important then. All of those values that Islam talks about and requires the Muslim to believe in and to practice are part of this Sharia, part of those laws that come and they say you do this and you do that, or this is unallowed, this is unlawful, and this is lawful. So this is very important. Now, what's called the general goals of the Sharia are 5 actually. Number 1 is the maintenance of life and protection of offspring. This is very important aspect of the Sharia, to protect life. Number 2, protection of an individual's freedom of belief. Again, in Islam in the Quran itself, there are more than 200 to 300 verses that talk basically about this issue in one way or the other. That's why I said between 200 and 300, because some of them talk about it directly, some of them indirectly, that a person has the freedom to decide for their religion. And the most known one is that there's no compulsion in religion. There should not be any compulsion in religion. You cannot coerce anybody to adopt your religion. Number 3, maintaining the intellect. And number 4, preservation of honor and integrity of the human being. Number 5, protection of property. If you look at those, I think they are universal values. Those are Canadian values, universal values for humanity to really live with. And so Islam is not, doesn't have its own ways of doing things. It really reinforces and it emphasizes those principles that people agree. They're common sense. They make sense to everybody, and Islam emphasizes them. Now, those then are the general guiding things. And now I would like to talk briefly about the sources, actually, of the Islamic Sharia. The sources of the Islamic Sharia. They come, number 1 is the Quran. Number 2 is the Sunnah, or the tradition of the Messenger, Muhammad. Number 3, consensus, or ijma'. Number 4, analogy, or qiyas. Analogy. And this, the last one is usually done through a process that is called ijtihad. Ijtihad is to make an intellectual effort, actually. It's the law of deductive logic, usually, that you arrive at new rulings. The last one, now the first one, the Quran, was revealed to Prophet Muhammad through a period of 23 years. That's what Muslims believe, that it is the exact word of God. The Quran, Muslims believe, is the exact word of God that was revealed to Muhammad with the agency, or by the agency of Gabriel, over a period of 23 years. So every word in the Quran, every letter in the Quran is from God. And that's why the Quran is so sacred for Muslims. I know that in general, with Christians, that people may ask who wrote the Bible. I mean, there's debate if every word is from God or is it from, the writers of the Bible. For Muslims, this question is not there. For Muslims, mean, this is really the vast majority of Muslims. This is a given thing. This is a fact for them. Now, the Sunnah is the actions, the sayings, and the deeds, basically, of the messenger. It is again the embodiment of the Quran, because the messenger's mission is basically to show people how to behave and how to apply the rules that are provided to them by God, and in this case, the Quran here. Now, ijma' is the consensus of the grand imams, and this is one aspect. So if all imams agree on one thing, then it becomes part of the Sharia or the law. The last one is really what gives Islam its mobility and dynamic nature. Because the Quran and the Sunnah or the traditions were revealed and were done 1400 years ago. But Islam exists today, and Muslims believe, there are 1.5 billion Muslims around the world. So we can imagine this is continuing to be here for a long time, maybe until the end of time. And so Muslims believe those rules can be applied anytime until the day of judgment. And so to give Islam mobility, we have what's called qiyas and ijtihad. This process of looking at the principles and deriving new rules for the new challenges. If something did not exist at the time of the messenger, when the Quran was revealed, then the scholars of the Sharia will look into the issue and see how it fits with those grand goals that I mentioned, the 5 grand roles of the Sharia and the grand principles that I talked about before, about the pillars of Islam and the pillars of Iman. And so they weave them all together within the Sharia and they arrive at new rulings. And so this is a very important process for Muslims. Now, those are the 4 important ones. But there are other sources for the Sharia. And in particular here, I would like to mention 2. One is called maslaha mursala, and that is the public interest. So if people have interest in certain things, important things, and also let me put with it the local customs, local traditions. If those traditions do not contradict Islam in principles, the principles of Islam, then they become part of the law. If you look deeply into this, you find this what gives, again, this is part of giving Islam also different interpretations. So the Sharia is not one law for everybody all the time at all places. The Sharia may differ with time and place. At the same time, we're living today, for instance, the same Sharia or the different Sharias could be applied for Muslims in, let's say, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, or Pakistan and Muslims who are living in North America. It could be different because it has to accommodate for the local customs, for the local laws, for the local things that are Muslims living with, as long as those laws do not contradict major things in Islam. So again, this is another way to see the dynamism of Islam. So, and those again are important aspects of the Sharia. There is something called, let me just briefly say here, jurisprudence or fiqh in Islam. And there are at least 5 ways of, 5 schools of thought in Islam. 4 within the Muslim Sunnah community and 1 for the Shia Muslim community. There are many within the Shia community, actually, I should say. But it is very important to see how it developed. I'm not going to go through those for the interest of time, but I just wanted to mention that the Islamic jurisprudence or fiqh is part of the Sharia or part of the way, the mechanism that the new laws actually are enacted. So fiqh and Sharia, or the sources of fiqh and the sources of the Sharia, are very much the same. I do not want to confuse you. The Sharia and the Fiqh, jurisprudence, they really combine in taking their resources from the Quran, the Sunnah, the ijma or consensus, and from analogy, and also from public interest and the local customs. The Sharia law, let me make a few statements here. The Sharia law controls, rules, regulates all public and private behavior for Muslims. It has regulations ranging from personal hygiene, diet, sexual conduct, elements of child rearing, to religious, public, national, and international issues and conflicts. So you can see again, this is just another way to say, for Muslims, the Sharia or Islam is a way of life. A very recent poll was taken in many different Muslim countries, and the vast majority of them say they would like to go with the Islamic Sharia law. So this is in Muslim countries. Of course, we're talking here in Canada, it is different because Muslims are a minority here, and the laws of the Sharia can only be implemented on Muslims, or should be only implemented on Muslims. And so for those people who propagate the application of the Sharia in Canada, I think this is a call that is really not befitting, because it will distort the principles of Islam when even though there are the certain principles, the general principles, but if you do not subscribe to say believing in God, if you do not believe in the hereafter, if you do not believe in certain things, then you're not required to be, doing what the Sharia says. And this is again the tolerance that Islam shows and offers to people. So in Canada, I do not think the Islamic Sharia is applicable in any way, because it is a completely different environment. But for Muslims, they may apply certain parts of it upon themselves within the conditions that they live in. The Sharia is viewed by the Muslim world as a vehicle to solve all problems, civil, criminal, and international. Practicing of Sharia is a religious duty for each Muslim. So again, it's for Muslims, not for non-Muslims, because as I mentioned earlier, usually the direction comes in the Quran in the sense that, those who you have believed. So it's for believers. For the people who do not believe, then they have different sets to go by, and they have their own ways of doing things. Just to give you an idea about the different rulings in the Sharia, there are 5 ways to look at the Sharia laws. There are certain laws that are prescribed or mandatory things for people to do. There are things that are recommended or loved to be done. And there are things that are permissible or allowed. And this is actually the largest domain within the Sharia law, that things are allowed. You want to plan your city, you plan it the way you want. You want to live your life, you live it the way you want. You want to eat, you eat whatever you want, save a few things that are forbidden for Muslims. You want to, cook certain ways. You want to do your building certain. So it's really very open, and this is the major issue here in the Sharia, is that this domain is so huge, and the original state of things in Islam is that they are allowable, that they are permissible. People live their life, and that's how the local customs actually, and the local traditions and the local laws may fit in and say, okay, if those, we live with those because they're part of where we're living, and the vast majority of those laws do not contradict the Sharia. So the Muslim lives in Canada. Being a Muslim Canadian is so simple and so easy, because that's a question for some people. Can you be Canadian and Muslim at the same time? Yes, you can be Canadian and Muslim at the same time very easily, actually. In fact, Canada, I think, provides one of the best conditions for Muslims with the principles of the freedoms that we have, because those freedoms are the same freedoms that Islam really talks about. Our freedom of worship, our freedom of religion. There's no discrimination on the basis of race, gender, nationality, religion. All of those are Islamic values. So for a person like me, a Canadian Muslim, I feel at home here, and I feel very, very comfortable practicing my religion and being a good Canadian citizen at the same time. There is no contradiction, none whatsoever. Now, number 4, let me just go back to number 4. There are certain things that are disliked or not encouraged, hated a little bit. And so those people are encouraged not to do them. And the last one is the unlawful. Unfortunately, a lot of times you find even Muslims, when they look at issues, they will say 2 words in Islam, halal or haram, allowed or not allowed, or lawful or unlawful. So they take the first one and the last one. They do not look at the 3 other levels that are very important within the Islamic Sharia. And so they talk about, again, this is, Muslims call it sometimes that what they call halal. I don't know if you've heard about the halal meat, for instance. Muslims look for halal meat. That's lawful meat to eat, and also the haram, like alcohol is haram. It's forbidden. It's not allowed for the Muslims. So, but the vast majority of issues that we face actually may fall in between the halal. That's the prescribed things, the obligatory things are really limited, and the forbidden things are also limited, and the vast majority of issues fall in between, especially in the middle one, number 3, that's the allowed, the permissible, or al-mubah in Arabic. I don't want to bother you with some of the terminology here because of the interest of time.
So what does that mean then, going back? Because I know they're about family law and criminal law.
Number 5. Oh, unlawful or prohibited. This is the last one. This is the same thing that I was talking about.
Yeah, but I don't understand.
Oh, the family or criminal law. Oh, this one is just like, for instance, some of the things within the family law, for instance, adultery is unlawful if we take it within the family context here. If somebody is cheating on somebody in Islam, this is not just a family issue between the 2 spouses, it is an issue for the law. But of course, we're living here, for instance, in Canada, then nothing can be done legally. You have to go with the legal laws, or with the laws that are in Canada. I'm sorry?
Family laws of Canada apply in family law?
Yes. Yes,
the presentation to questions right after, so
Yeah.
let
He's going by.
Yeah. Well, don't worry about that one. That's why I didn't talk about it. No, you can ask any question you want after I am done. I'm very open to all questions because I want this to be beneficial to you. There are just a few terminologies. Don't worry about those either. There are, when we talk about crimes in Islam, there are 6 of them there's prescribed punishments for them: murder, corruption on earth, theft, adultery, defamation, and intoxicants. Those are the 6 things that there are set punishments for them. So for murder, if somebody kills another person in a cold-blooded, premeditated murder, that they planned everything and they wanted to do it, and there is no excuse, none whatsoever, for the punishment to be reduced, then the capital punishment may be applied on them. Let me add here, actually, is that Islam gives the family of the killed person the opportunity to forgive the killer. So see, even with that, it is not a foregone conclusion that you kill the killer. It is up to the family. If the family says, we accept something called, what is it? They give them money for the killing, or killing money if you wish, just like compensation if you wish. If the family agrees to that, they may take money. They may say, we do not want money, we do not want anything, and we forgive you. Then they have that opportunity, and capital punishment will not be applied. Capital punishment in that case will not be applied. So it's up to the family of the killed person. Corruption on earth is that when people, this is open for when people are doing, great bad things, then there is punishment for them. The theft is usually done by cutting off the hand. This is something that most people are aware of. Adultery is called adultery for any relationship outside of marriage for Muslims, not only for married people. So fornication is part of this, and there is punishment for it. And defamation is that when you talk about the honor of other people, when you degrade other people, there is punishment for that. And intoxicants, when I talk about the punishment, is that basically there is public whipping for those people, so that they will stop when they are degrading other people. So they will be defamed themselves in public. In other words, intoxicants, the same thing for people. If they drink alcohol, in Islam it's forbidden because it does so many other crimes and many other problems. We know that the vast majority of crimes are done, maybe not the vast majority, I have to be precise, but a lot of crimes are done when people are drunk. We find a lot of people are killed on the highways because our people are driving while drunk. So this is something that's in Islam here. Let me just move through this here, because we're running out of time, so I would like to, this is just explanations for the murder and all of this. I don't want to bother you with that. Let me just go to some of the conclusions. Islamic law is very different from English common law or the European civil law in general. Muslims are bound to the teachings or by the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran. Muslims are held accountable to the Sharia law, but non-Muslims are not bound by the same standards. It's up to them to decide for themselves. At the present time, most Islamic countries and some Islamic minorities apply Sharia family laws, but very few countries apply the Sharia law in general. Very, very few Muslim countries these days apply the Sharia law. And here we come to questions.
Well, thank you, Imam Rachid. My name is